Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Morning, Silvia.
Hey, good morning.
Morning. So, hello. Welcome.
I know Vidhi said something, but otherwise nobody was here earlier as far as I can tell, although I didn't get here directly at 10 either. So.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, as for updates, for meetings, we didn't have a DeviantArt meeting this week. We did have an open source meeting. And of course, I continued with the community period for GSOC. I talked about some of the project management aspects of projects in open source. I talked about the open source productivity model and how that differs from a proprietary model, and some other things as well. And so that video is on YouTube. Other than that, it's been in the lab, at least it's been a pretty slow week. We've been working on some different things. I know Jesse has been, it looks like his blog has been pretty active. I saw a couple of posts. I saw an update on the MIT symposium and some other things. So I don't know if Jesse wanted to provide an update on that. We can do that.
Yeah, last night, well, was a culmination of a lot of things, I suppose. But I've been reorganizing myself and my online writings and things like that. I can get into all of that sooner or later, and I don't know if we have a preference because it'll probably be. I can go through the website and maybe I had wanted to finish a bit more of a write up on the AI Ventures event, where I got to be a judge or be a part of that. But I don't have anything really to show. Although I do have nice pictures that I can show from that because John Werner does a pretty good job of giving people nice pictures and trying to sort of document stuff, which I appreciate. I say that as someone who when I was in college and undergraduate, I was the person who was like, well, we gotta get a picture of this, otherwise nobody's gonna know that it happened. In the sense of I was with student organizations, and at that time, it wasn't like kind of it is now. I mean, I say that, but at the same time, there's a lot of organizations right now that don't really publicize or market what they do. And at the time, it was a lot more ragtag, and cell phones couldn't quite do everything they do now as well as they do. So it was a lot more kind of guerrilla style and just really trying to just make things happen. But I appreciate sort of his fundamental concern for trying to offer highlighting things that need to be highlighted, and the effort that people do. It sometimes just doesn't. Sometimes it just goes away. There's nothing of it. And, memories and things are nice and important, but sometimes you have to actually document what's going on, as we know on many different fronts. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just getting my own self set up, but if you want, I can launch into all that stuff like sooner than later, or not even start now. But it'll be kind of a slow start if I do that. So let me know.
So I wanted to bring up a couple of social media mentions of the lab and their activities. So the first one is this post on Blue Sky. It says Blake Richards, who posts, I guess he posted something here where there were a lot of responses to it. And so it says, "Dear neuroscientists, the brain cannot generate information about the world de novo. It's impossible. All the brain can do is, number one, selectively remove info that is irrelevant, and two, remit info previously absorbed via evolution or memory. Our brains can never create information, never." And then someone responded, "Do you have a preferred analysis of information?" And then this other person, aka Nickel Dave, said, "I hate it when I define information in terms of information theory, and then I'm unable to prove that information is information." So they cite the biological information article in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. They're one of our favorite references for things like that. Then this other person, Mario Godu, says, "I have no idea what information is, but this is my favorite paper about it." And this is the Bill Warren paper from 2021. "Information is where you find it. Perception is an ecologically well-posed problem." So we've talked about, ecological psychology, ecological perception, and things like that. And this is kind of one of the, it's an important paper in this area, and talking about how, as an ecological problem, perception is well posed. And so then this this is aka Nickel Dave, which raises the question of how to formalize Gibsonian information, as that article does. Looks like this is our paper on Gibson, one of our papers on Gibsonian information, have some ideas, and then they link to the arXiv article here. So that's nice that people are kind of reading that and synthesizing that with other references. Yeah. And then I wanted to congratulate Hrishikesh Kulkarni. So Hrishikesh Kulkarni was a member of the lab a long time ago. It was pre-2019, or actually right around like 2017 to 2019. And we did a lot of things one-on-one. And so he's actually he's received his PhD. He just did his defense, I think, a couple weeks ago. And I wasn't able to attend online, but I was glad that he was able to do that. I guess that's his doctoral committee there. So yeah, he says, "Happy to share that I've successfully defended my PhD dissertation, set ranked in generative IR, addressing low resource, low latency, and fragmented context challenges." So I remember he was like starting off his PhD like right at the beginning of the pandemic. So he's, that was a really tough time to start a degree program, but he made it through. So that's great. Congratulations, Hrishikesh.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't think I did a whole lot with him, but I know him, and I am very happy to see him go through stuff. So I'll make sure that the lab. I just found like some other like current summer code stuff, and people talking about it on LinkedIn and wherever, and I'll be sure to hit him up there. So
Yeah,
that's good to see that. More alumni.
Yeah. Okay, so that was the couple items that I saw online. I wanted to bring it to our attention as a group. So I don't know, Jesse, are you ready to present or just discuss things, or what?
Yeah. Let's see. I think it's usually a bit early for Morgan, but if you want to go with anything, Morgan, you can. But otherwise, I'll start in just a second. Get my stuff set up here. The biggest thing that I'll mention is probably the computing posts, which is actually the month of May has just been wild and in a good way. Like it's just very, very condensed for me personally because I've had so much. There's been a lot going on. There's a lot of things that actually have been able to be pushed forward, and in general, I don't know, some uh, sorry. There's just been quite a bit of moving parts that are finally kind of settling and getting in motion, and it's just been a series of boom, boom, boom. The first thing from this month was this event. Um, this is the main one. Yeah, I'll just go to this one. So yeah, on May 1st, I attended. I actually tried to make this into a social because for some of the projects, I'm trying to make these social events around um, kind of like local meetups. Like there's this, we do some, this lab, our lab is virtual and all of this stuff. But I'm trying whenever I'm in like a relevant city or whatever, or there's events to offer the chance to kind of do an in-person meetup. I made a few. I forget if they were actually from, you know, the invites. I have a Luma calendar that's kind of more like oriented towards like in-person events and stuff. But I've made a few contacts and it was actually an amazing event. It's essentially, in essence, it's a year-end event for this sort of not really department, but a big theme in the computing school at MIT. Um, but um, it's super relevant to a lot of things in data and direction. And I didn't even get to stay the whole time or take great notes on everything. But um, this was it. I don't think I put this one to Medium yet, so I will send it to Medium if I haven't.
Yeah.
I've just been, as you might have seen, I'm just sorting out a lot of things in Substack and getting things kind of where they should be and going from there and kind of leaning into that one. But yeah, to kind of quickly go through this one, this is a really interesting talk. Uh, um, and the kind of crux of this talk was about how we always focus on, regulations and stuff like that and in terms of having your clinical AI, things that like diagnose, things that identify what's happening inside somebody, and trying to use AI to enhance all the stuff that you can do. It is regulated in capacities for clinical AI, but this particular post looked at, or this particular talk from Isami looked at the challenges of what about the things that are pretty much adjacent to clinical stuff. And like in this case, it was sort of about like an example was scheduling. Like gender, like if someone is labeled as a gender female, they may be slanted towards, well, maybe you don't need to come into the office yet because of just certain biases or trainings or whatever, and ways that administratively and not clinically, things and sort of things that are adjacent to the clinical, somewhat, uh, the more regulated clinical things, but these sort of adjacent structures that also AI is being used and demographic data and personal data is being used and evaluated from. Um, and here in Boston area, like there's tons of hospitals and they all use AI, and sort of this, I don't know if it was a joke or sort of a just a reality, but basically all the machine learning teams, all the hospitals have these machine learning teams in the basement to try to fix problems that happen. And she was basically saying, well, that's, it's nice to have that, but how do we get towards actually um, trying to create better models to begin with and realize that the use cases for the models and the biases that they have, um, even if they're not in a quote unquote clinical setting, still have a gigantic amount of influence and are imperfect, and we need to keep the pressure on making that better. Um, so it was an interesting talk, especially with I have done some work in a similar space about getting sort of this juxtaposition between getting data from a patient and then uh, making a care plan and then the implementation of the care plan. And those are all critical areas, but the if you will, the bias or the challenge space for each of them is is different and potentially immense. So yeah, this is just a deep dive into that. I don't really recall some of her solutions, or like what we do about this, other than kind of the obvious: make better products and try to diffuse the biases and all that stuff. But what I tried to do in this post, and I won't go through everything, is a little bit of pictures if they're there, a little bit of the session proper from the main website, and I've tried to find some papers or at least relevant links for the speakers and stuff like that. In part because we might come back here, like a lot of the interns um, that I've been interviewing for anyway. Like if they're undergrads, like this is a nice real world primer to say, hey, what in this space kind of looks appealing to you, um, and kind of give them some examples of, oh, I like this, but I don't know a lot. Well, here's very clear examples of a lot of the things around sort of applied data science, data ethics, responsible AI, so on. Really briefly, I'll mention this one. It's quite interesting. Um, this is from Josh Tenenbaum's lab, Joshua Tenenbaum, who we um, periodically mention, and I get excited because I find her to be one of the better folks that's sort of fighting this good fight between cognitive science matters in the world, and working to sort of justify relative to a lot of pressures from AI that studying the human mind is like, well, but he's in the thick of it and he's doing good things. And Sydney Levine is a very interesting presenter. I don't know if you can see this super well, but she's basically come up with this a triple theory of moral cognition, deontology, consequentialism, contractualism. Um, and I won't get into that right now, but it was a very interesting talk. And uh, there's quite a bit in the alignment space, and that's a worthy topic for sure. Supply chain is interesting. I'm trying to remember what to say about this one. Um, a very, I think, a lot of these presentations were they sort of listed the PI's lab and the doctoral student or whatever would speak about it. So Susan Silsby's done a lot in this space. It had a very interesting uh, comment and Q&A, which I did not uh, put here and remember. It was a very interesting talk to kind of see. Yeah, so I feel like what are you kind of doing? You're looking for like regulation, professional industry standards, organizational self-regulation, government procurement, and then contracts and torts. And it's sort of like, well, um, one of the kind of things that was uh, in the air and very on the nose for some of these things. Like I think one of the last on the list, people were saying sort of, well, what do we do in a political moment like this where trying to engage the government is maybe challenging to do some of the regulation work. So that's a whole other can of worms that I'm just going to sidestep for now, um, and talk about a few more. Algorithmic homogeneity, um, a critical topic, but um, was this the one that was? Yeah, this is actually a really yeah. There were a number of links and references here. I don't think I should probably write up more here in this space, but basically it was sort of unintended, looking at unintended collusion between different people using the same algorithm or the same software, um, impacts on creativity, the nature of competition, and like how generative AI facilitates that or not, and systemic risk in financial systems. There's a lot going on here, and same algorithm, same data, similar correlation, but unintended coordination. So, and there was a little bit about different groups basically using the unin the pitfalls and the opportunities for good things and bad things when the same algorithm is used everywhere, so to say. This is another good talk, and very regional focused. And should there be different standards of care, and just sort of the reality that if you train a model based on all this data that's in, let's say, America, because it's probably where a lot of the bigger models are focused, how does it do when you go to the global south, go to a totally different region? And just looking at, it's not necessarily uh, perfect. Um, this study was looking at basically performance across different countries, I suppose. Whoops, yeah. And it sort of used this methodology comparing to these standards from UNESCO, from Santiago in Chile, and this inter-American framework. In a positive way, I mentioned this to uh, um, Valeria Schnake, who is a society ethics tech kind of alumni who's now graduated her degree from law and is kind of getting into the law stuff there. And she appreciated hearing about it. We might talk more about it ahead this presentation. It has to do with. I think this person is from Chile and centered some of the discussion on that part of Latin America. And so it kind of results in recommendations of cooperation, synergy, leveraging AI, and all these things. And a nice quote at the end of "Future's here, but is it distributed evenly or not?" And it is not. I'm not going to have a open debate on that right now. So yeah. Anyway, the mathematics of law making was also very good. It looked at this is the key takeaway. This should probably be highlighted. With smaller firms, this is about lobby view and lobbyists, and the last two are about law specifically. So it was very interesting to kind of see law, legal things, governments. This was a I think LobbyView is a database. I have it linked here. Yeah, let's look at that. Firm level lobbying and congressional bills database from Insung Kim. And this is a 2018 paper, but it's been in development for a long time, and it's just been interesting to kind of zoom out, like the level of care and duration that it takes to really do stuff. You can see this is a 2018 paper, right? And there's been a lot of development on it since then. And this is a nice I think this is sort of like an intro paper at that time. But you can see how like there's just like GPT at the level that it is now didn't exist at that time, and it's just I think it's so I'm always looking for ways to convey the rapidity of what's happening and how much it's like moving at warp speed or light speed, and then you're kind of riding, you got somebody in a bicycle, and you're saying, okay, how do we align these two people in their travels? And it's like, well, it's a rough show. So it, it not. I'm just saying that only out of the context of it is so critical and so hard to get moving. So even though the person's on the bicycle, like the distance they're covering and where they're going really matters, even if it's not as fast as tech is just completely, let's say the word disrupting many fronts. But these efforts are important, and you like, especially for things that are probably very relevant now in terms of seeing who makes what kind of bills. And so a big takeaway from all this was um, smaller firms tend to be negativist, or like negation oriented, like trying to challenge stuff, whereas large firms propose their own stuff or have an agenda, or are acting on behalf of a major think tank that has a very large agenda, things like that. So, and this was sort of an attempt to put the surveillance powers of AI back on the people with power, which I think is basically the name of the game on many fronts. And it's like, this is attempting to regulate and document, or bring visibility to lobbyists in this case. And finally, I'll briefly go over. This is a very interesting topic from Alicea, who's I think director of the GovLab, and Alex. I don't know if Alex was there or not in person, but Alex is the Stanford contingent, and we talk about this group plenty. But Deliberation IO, reimagining democratic engagement, facilitating large-scale open dialogues between citizens to strengthen collective decision-making. So what is this? Basically, it's an AI. It's a nonpartisan AI chatbot that simply goes through certain routines, I guess you could say, to engage or facilitate discussion. And it has these sort of different, I guess, I don't know, modules or operations. We have Socratic dialogue. Socratic dialogue, facing the crowd, dynamic deliberation, comment ordering, and preference aggregation. And what is this? Sorry, I think I'm jumping a slide here when I do this. Okay, never mind. So it would kind of have these different modules, and I'm kind of burying the headline, but what we're learning so far is, can these platforms encourage more of the social, ethical, and political benefits of deliberation? Basically, with the Socratic dialogue, when there's sort of a general question of, oh, well, how do you know this, or why do you think this way? It's like a general light, regardless of who the person is or what they where in the spectrum of politics they are, the general act of offering kind of an even-handed, simple questioning and regulation of what's going on moves people towards the middle. So it's essentially a de-escalator thing. And for those who are not familiar with American politics, the story in the last decade plus has been the extremification in this sense, and how much there's amplification to, let's say, divisiveness in particularly I would say in discourse, or like online discourse, or bringing up stuff. I will always remember some non North American folks saying, oh, what's your take on Americans? And like, well, um, they're really nice, but don't talk about politics because they're gonna argue with you. Like, and you can kind of see the conditioning from the outside perspective of like they can't have a conversation because Americans are so trained to work as an influence to to be very bitter and divisive and to take a point and just contend it and ride the contention. So this is an interesting AI application for maybe neutralizing some of those amplified antagonisms. Face the crowd, showing people the face of the crowd demonstrates how much we agree with each other. As in, I think facing the crowd, I may be getting this wrong, is sort of not just trying to combat the loudest voices in the room and saying, well, here's what everybody actually is thinking about this kind of a deal, as opposed to just centering the potential vocal minorities. AI moderated conversation increases nuance, discussion, understanding, and legitimacy of platform. It also uncovers clear areas of agreements for deliberation one. And then common ordering is about sort of their sense of representation, legitimacy. And then they're doing some field studies, and very enthused about the results, at least they are. So they're getting to do this in DC and have some partners. And next steps involve, of course, using more LLMs to do certain things, more testing, and then getting other field locations. Like they're kind of starting in DC, which is a very specific location, and then getting it in these different places. So you kind of have different arenas to test out how will those models perform there, which is probably pretty useful. So I guess the chatbot is supporting reflection is one thing, but people realizing that it's having an impact there. So a lot of cool things there, a lot of cool things to follow up on. Some final takeaways and questions are basically what doesn't randomization fix, but it doesn't always work out. This is sort of what I said at the start. What clinical adjacent spaces exist where we're using Gen AI and agential stuff that's shaping outcomes, but in a way that's not regulated, informed, or monitored to the degrees that clinical areas are. Where does genuine information diversity come from, and who's incentivized to support it or not? And can or should AI be a supported reflection? Kind of the last one. Become a norm in online spaces rather than the exception. What's the line between stabilizing and depolarizing versus steering people or manipulating them? These are all kind of like huge questions that aren't going to have answers, but that you can be kind of be explored. Like, how is this technology essentially, in the Norbert Wiener sense, how's the technology this sort of instantiation or an application of ethics, and where is it steering it, and what can it do? And I think sort of the unsaid thing for all these posts is sort of like, and now that we're in 2025, because this is all research people are doing now, this is all happening now, but 2025 is a very different landscape for a lot of things to be operating in. So what does that entail? Any questions about that before I move on? Sorry, I'm saying
yeah, that looks really interesting. Glad you were able to go and give a report on that.
Yeah, it was a nice time, and it's just these are sort of rapid loose notes. There were many other very good talks there, and I didn't get to stay for all of them, but it's a nice sort of overview here. Anything else to mention? That's pretty much it for this week. I know I took a good chunk of time to get through all that stuff. There's a few other happenings this week we are doing the internships. We are doing we had a really nice open source meeting. I don't know if we're going to talk more about that later or anything, but we're kind of moving through the community period and excited to get started more in a few weeks.
All right, yeah. Yeah, so how do you envision a lot of what you have been doing with data plus direction? I mean, you've got like the society, tech, and ethics, and you've got data plus direct or data times direction, and I know it's a kind of a separate project, but how do you think those two things interface?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, my structure for a lot of this stuff is if I basically I've shifted my language to these things um, kind of in the last year, in that working groups are sort of just their working groups. So cognition futures, society ethics tech. Um, there's sort of a fledgling working group called mental health paradigms and perspectives, which is me and also Jen, the master student who we've been here a few times in the past. And I might be getting a few advisors there also with sort of clinical and therapeutic spaces. And I feel like I'm missing like representational brains and phenotypes. I would say as a working group, it's not a Jopra one that I made, obviously, but like I feel like that's representational brains and phenotypes sort of represents a nice collection of like it's more of a collection projects. Data and direction, for example, is very clearly a project to me in that it's not it's much more applied. So it's sort of Joe Pro offers working groups, and then working groups can combine and interact on projects. So working groups are much about people. So like society ethics technology is a group of people who have done things, and a project in this space is data and direction. Um, so I don't know. You mean like administratively more so, or like where do I want to go next with data and direction overall?
Well, I guess, well, A, where do you want to go next? But B, there are obvious connections here. And I know that, like, we've sometimes we'll get into one project and then put another one aside, or if you're working on a paper or some initiative, and stuff you've done before sometimes just kind of you don't think about it. And I know we,
Mm.
we do this at papers a lot, where we write a paper where we have a discussion and it just kind of gets buried. So I want to make sure that like we have this good connection between the things we've been discussing and society, ethics, tech, and then some of the newer stuff, and just see how those things kind of what the continuity is, what the opportunities are, etc.
Yeah, I mean, like I see data and direction as basically, I it's a direct say disciple, but the direct descendant from my master's program and from the capstone work I've done there and the ethics courses I've done there. And essentially, the goal of the project is to be really targeted at, I guess you could say, people in the AI space specifically, but the data scientists, data ethics, responsible AI, and offering opportunities. Like I wanted to offer opportunity, not just sort of like like in the past, I guess Brian McCorkle and some other folks essentially were interns in the working group of society ethics technology. And I mean, you could say now that people joining would also be. I would phrase it like that in the sense of let me share my let me share my screen again. Yeah, I'll do it like this. So like in the sense of how things are here, um, like this was an introduction of a specific project within a working group, but I kind of have it here, like what are the groups and what are the projects. And so here's attempting a project within the group. So projects are a little bit more people trying to do certain sets of things. And then the working groups are just the collection of it. I don't have a good example to show right now. Here's some working groups, like Cognition Futures, which I think needs to be updated.
Yeah.
But like this is sort of like the first ever working group that I made, and it's a little bit on the back burner right now. But it's not lost or anything like that. It's just where I'm really leaning into building out the from here to there one and data and direction projects right now. And I don't know if I made. Yeah, here we go. This is a project. It's under Society Ethics Tech, and we're doing all this stuff here. So hosting some internships. I'm not necessarily trying to. My current round of internships focus are basically attempting to get. It's not so much project based as in just individual based. It's almost going to be more like I don't know, kind of an applied mentorship where in part because I haven't been sure who was going to apply. So I kept it kind of very general at first, but it it's been very interesting to see sort of where people are at and what they want to do, and finding a lot of interesting topical spaces and also like a little variation in experience levels. So some people really want to do research, some people don't want to do research, and there's like making a paper, and we'll see where that goes in terms of what the actual that cohort is ahead for this term, this next first round of it, I suppose. So yeah, that's the broad overview of those things, I guess. But nothing's society ethics and tech is still there. It's just like an example of a previous project for society ethics tech would be a lot of the stuff for NICWIC, like the innovation panel, and then a lot of the other like potpourri stuff. And I would periodically look for these things, these opportunities to, okay, we're going to apply to this and do this and we'll do this thing happening. And that will eventually come around for data and direction too, specifically as a little more centered group of probably basically the people who are data scientists reaching back out. Like a lot of my framing and phrasing and background for society ethics tech is this a place where technical and non-technical folk can come together and get the experience of the cross-functional and the being in that space. And so this data and direction, I think, will be a little more focused on what, from a deeper point of technical fluency about the models, the data and stuff, where does it connect back to society and functions that way? So that's kind of the vision for those things, yeah.
All right, sounds good. Anyone else have any questions for Jesse? Or anyways, yeah, it's great. So thank you for that update, showing us the what's been going on in that space. I think it's really interesting work. All right. I don't know, Morgan, did you have any updates, or are you in a position you can give an update?
Sorry. Let's see, updates. No, just things still progressing. Lots of events have been happening here, but can't say much to update in terms of progress on projects. there was an event at the Institute of Genomics down in UC Santa Cruz. So I'm hoping to hear about that just in terms of reaching out to the brain engineers. Yeah, usual updates in various Slack channels, and it's always interesting to see Terrence Tao using LLMs to do work.
Yeah.
And let's see, anything coming up that's yeah, just hoping to do some events both in neurotech around acousto-electric ultrasound, and there will be a online foresight meeting. I'll drop a few links in the chat, just in terms of.
Is the online meeting like neuroscience related? Or?
It's in their neurotech group, but it's their neurotech has a kind of weird and wonderful broadness to it. So the I think their next neurotech speaker is actually someone that already spoke last month at Brain Inspired, and relates to game theory. I'll find that. I was actually just on my way out the door, but I'll find the link. But it's this kind of strange connection that they make between neurotech and AI safety. That is a big, I know part of it is because it's a big, funding focus for them. As I did drop a link to the California Institute of Machine Consciousness proposals, there is a similar new foresight round. So CIMC is somewhat similarly focused in terms of their neurotech. Like they don't call it neurotech, but their proposals are related to kind of again computationally creating consciousness, as well as this kind of to me somewhat weird antagonism between machine consciousness and biological consciousness. Or again, it's always framed in this kind of AI safety, like are you creating consciousness, or are you doing something that will help us to limit machine consciousness in terms of its dangers, something like that. Which yeah, the connection to biological intelligence is not clear to me in terms of how it mitigates AI safety concerns. But I know that's a focus, and that'll be one of the meetings. There's a couple meetings that I'll just highlight in that chat in terms of
what Patrick Minolta is up to now.
Yeah,
AI safety thing, right?
No, absolutely, right. So Neuro AI for AI safety is his big white paper, and Amarath Foundation is which is funding the, I think they call it Enigma, right? Which is somewhat confusing to me because I'm in the Enigma consortium, which relates to neuroimaging and genetics. But Enigma for them, I think, is supposed to be kind of like a grand challenge project, like World War II, and very much whole brain emulation. But again, the strange part, or the part that I don't get about this, is how whole brain emulation, kind of addresses AI safety. There's a little kind of magical thinking at the end, which is something like, by creating something more embodied but still artificial, we solve alignment or something like that. But there will be a Neurotech summit at one of these. Again, I don't know how you refer to these, Jess. These pop-up cities.
So like the Luma event things, or
no. These. I mean, I kind of want to call them these kind of like crypto-related, or events.
yes,
I mean, is that a fair characterization?
Well, I think that's a very valid, like real talk. Yeah, like it's people that are kind of like, well, not even people, but like it's sort of like, and this is a chat, like at a to be constructive about it, like this is a challenge that when you're trying to get an agenda off the ground, you're trying to figure out how the hell do I relate this to funding and trends that people care about.
Yeah.
And so I have no idea. I'm totally agnostic and very ignorant about where some of Neuro AI for Safety is touching upon and going. Like I've seen some things that are very compelling in terms of, trying to address specific problems, but then there's also what Morgan just said. And in terms of like the events, like there's sort of this like, hey, we're having a meeting space around this thing, or I want to be in this location because there's stuff going on here. Let's have a tie-in, and it's both useful and it's both difficult at times, and both sort of speaks to the challenges of getting funding and getting a foot in the door and getting the talent and the brain power. Like the kind of far side of that would be, well, all the top talent from the Ivy League schools is going to go into consulting, and sort of the bottom up grassroots version of that, like, well, like let's do crypto and some AI safety stuff because they have sort of more cult followings right now, and how do we associate it there? So maybe I'm speaking a little too far in that direction, but as a
it's I mean, I don't know. This is exactly like I don't know how to describe Esmeralda, but it's a pop-up village in Northern California, very, very small town, and there'll be talks around a wide set of topics for a month, 2.5 days of which will be a Neurotech summit. So I'm looking forward to it. Patrick Minot and Sean Escola, who I believe was one of the Neuromatch co-founders. Anyway, but two people who definitely know neuroscience are putting something together. But I do imagine that it's somewhat around, and they fund these, very noble, very frontier projects.
Yeah.
That said, that seemed to me to be very similar to things like the Human Brain Project, right? I mean, in the sense that or certainly the Big Brain Project, So I keep telling them yes, no, I'm familiar with this kind of work because I've already seen the European Human Brain Project. So I've seen work at this level doing, this kind of, very high-end histology microscopy. And I think we should learn a lesson that there's only so much that you actually get from that, right? like there's been a lot of soul searching after the first €1 billion of the Human Brain Project, of what these kinds of computational models actually deliver, and I don't, as much as I see this kind of new connection with these computational models to AI alignment, what I don't see is any new technology or insight that says why we should expect a different result this time.
Yes.
That everything about it is incremental in terms of what microscopy has brought to bear, what geometric modeling has brought to bear, and certainly, and this is what I bring up at every meeting that I go to in this, is that the kinds of computational modeling that includes real biology is still way behind the kinds of abstract neural modeling that gives us things like neuromorphic computing,
Mm-hmm.
And so there still seems to be some missing elements, and to some degree, the little that Conrad Cording has shared with me at previous Foresight events, it was just okay, with C. elegans, we're going to try to fill some of those holes, with more high-end data collection and more molecular biology.
Mm-hmm.
But it's big difference, of course, between that and the kinds of mouse brain projects that most of these efforts seem to be centered around, or at least the Foresight projects that I see. Anyway, I'm very happy to be going and talking with the people involved in these projects, though. I mean, it's still exactly where I want to be in terms of learning what they're doing, seeing what resources are around, and I had the great privilege to talk with the person who's leading up generative AI at the Allen Institute at this last meeting, which was great, and really looking forward to going there in June 16th, 17th, or 16th through the 18th, at Allen Institute meeting for using open data in undergraduate education. So I'll drop some links.
Yeah, I'm sharing as Esmeralda now. I actually applied to some of the tracks there. Like I don't know how to say this. I'm definitely drawn to some of what Brendan McCord and the Cosmos Institute is trying to do, this sort of AI to law pipeline to get fits with a lot of data and direction type stuff. But there's like Consciousness Week, there's I think you were talking about, which week was it? Probably reality reinvented and some of the neuro. Oh no, Birds of Progress is in there too. I've been trying to follow some of their stuff. Environments of tomorrow. Here we go. Neurotech Summit. That's what you were talking about. Protocol Labs, and so yeah. But there's like I think I kind of got a little bit late to this event. It feels a bit like a conference, sort of futuristic, Burning Man-ish, but very very intellectual, and very people trying to build out these new technologies and things like that. So I'm envious if you get to go because it seems like a really fun time. And another reason for me, like I should probably spend some more time with you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like again, like I'm certainly looking forward to it. In terms of those 3 days, it's only an hour and a half away from me, so I can sort of justify that, and yeah, and the Foresight has been doing events at the Frontier Tower, the place where Joshua Bach. I dropped that photo of Joshua doing his salon there. So we're doing neurotech salons there as well, and really hoping to expand that to cover kind of the kind of molecular biology and nanotechnology that Foresight funds as well. And which is certainly part of the Ed Boyden Conrad Cording Institute, if it can be called that. I still haven't seen more details, but I assume it's just trying to implement what Conrad's vision for what's missing with C. elegans data.
Yeah, you mentioned the project from Boyded and Cording before too that I still can look into. But if you see anything about that or like think about it, feel free to nudge me in like whatever Slack. So
yeah, he there was a slide about it on the at this AI and Bio meeting that was in Berkeley. But again, no real details except that Foresight has certainly given the initial funding. And I'll drop a few more links, but I was just heading out. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting stuff. It was a good discussion. Yeah, I know you mentioned at yesterday's meeting, Morgan, about Conrad and Ed Boyden, and they were forming an institute. And I didn't know it. It sounded intriguing, but I didn't know what you meant by that. So I don't know if you know any more about if that's just institute by name or if they're actually planning on doing something.
No, I mean that's how they're. I mean, if the research they're referring to it,
Okay, yeah.
And and I would just also point out that these are they're both researchers who receive funding from these kinds of organizations. I don't just mean Foresight, but that are definitely actively seeking like Protocol Labs funding. That are definitely, involved in crypto and funds lots of this kind of AI safety projects. It's just the leap that I don't get is how this
helps with safety.
Oh yeah, yeah. I guess it's the old I need funding aspect. So, where you need funding, you make an argument for something, and it's not necessarily a good fit, but that's how people.
Sorry, did I get disconnected?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Just for a moment, though.
I think I left the Wi-Fi. Sorry, I was just saying that they both get funding from Foresight, and they both are courting this more again, like AI safety related funding from Protocol Labs.
Yeah.
That provides a lot of Foresight's actual money. Yeah.
Okay.
No details yet, but I'm impressed. I'm digging.
Yeah. I mean, it looked like from their white paper and we reviewed the white paper a long time ago in DevoWorm. I know that was an early iteration of what they're trying to do, but like it looked like that was something that would have to be like an organizational level effort. In other words, you'd have to have an institute to do it because you'd have all these collaborators and moving parts, and you'd need to have something, an organization to make that happen, I guess.
Yeah. And a lot of equipment.
Oh yeah.
But these all strike me as like, this just seems like a European brain project, but about perhaps a more appropriate model system. I mean, am I going crazy here? So I mean, I love it because, of course, this is the model system that maybe somebody should have started with. But yeah.
So Jesse said, with respect to brain inspired, I think they're covering this paper very soon. They have I think they're brain inspired. They review papers in a paper. I think you had mentioned this in the Slack. You had taken some pictures of
the complexity group just did the McCullen Pitts paper.
Yeah.
And that was super interesting. Just because it is such it's a paper that has so much
history and lore. Yes.
Yeah. So the woman leading the discussion, who's a PhD in mathematics, was talking about just how difficult this paper is to read because it requires this level of that you need to know Whitehead and Russell's Principia Mathematicas terminology or notation, and then you have to know Rudolf Carnap's like logic work as well for its notation, to just to be able to translate it into kind of a modern representation.
Yeah.
And, but it continues to be a wonderful group. And then the last speaker, Jess, if you can find the brain-inspired talk that includes game theory, it's been in the last month, maybe even like the last couple of weeks.
Is it like from Brain Inspired Proper, the podcast?
Proper. Yeah, okay. Brain Inspired Proper. It's like first name is like Arun or Arun.
Aran.
Anyway,
yeah. Aran and Nayabi.
Yeah. What's the title? Sorry.
The Neuro AI Turing Tests.
Yes, there you go. Yeah. So you can it's funny because it's like if you look over kind of the latest brain inspired talks, this is the one that would be, if you had to guess which one would be the most interest to Foresight.
Yeah.
This is their next speaker next week.
Oh, okay.
But this will be on the online Zoom group.
Okay, cool. I'll put this in here if anyone wants to see this.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Brain Inspired proper, and they have a complexity group going through all the papers from the Krakauer complexity book. That's what I was showing here.
Yeah.
Cool.
So this group, like, what are the papers that they've done so far? Do they have like a list of?
Like
Yes.
Slizard.
They've done. They're all early
blanking?
papers.
Yeah.
It's in. If you go to the server, I'm in the server, and it's not. I don't think it's like very gay kept or anything. So look into the
Yeah.
server. It's 1922 Lotka,
Lotka, there you
1929 Slizard, 1932 Wright, 1942 Waddington, and then 1943 McCullough Pick. So they're really starting like century ago, you know, and build it out from there.
Well, it sounds like you've got the what is it? I guess thermodynamics, evolutionary landscapes, neural networks, epigenetic landscapes, and then ecology, or like I guess early dynamical system stuff. It's an interesting set of like topics that they're trying to get at. Have they been drawing a lot of connections like between the papers, or I wonder what their goal is in picking the papers that they've picked.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You have something to say?
No. I mean, I've attended a couple, and I've attended a couple of the kind of set up for the meeting. And, you know, there's certainly, I wouldn't say that there's a big attempt on trying to put them in a proper order or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's definitely been impressive to see how people have certainly some people are bringing historical context, and some people are just bringing, you know, a great knowledge of the particular field or topic.
To make a rough comment that is lacking nuance and polish. I think the majority of the discussions that I've seen, and I haven't been deeply involved in all of them, have basically been people just struggling to get through what did these people mean at the time.
Okay.
And it more or less with varying degrees of how fruitful that is. And I've seen a few comments saying, you know, it's nice to try to go through this paper, but it's been even better to see the community trying to talk about it. It's sort of like if you're in a grad course and the teacher's kind of like so-so and the material's hard to read, you've got great classmates. Yeah. And they're like, hey, did you know about this article? And there's this great video that explains this. It's kind of like that vibe. And I think that's fair. I think that's literally like it's not a denigration of anything. That's what it's at. And I think when you're looking at the origins or the fringes of things, like that's kind of, you know, we get a little bit, you know, prisoner of the moment where, you know, and everything right now is in this agential AI, LLM, Gen AI speak that people may not give as much of a care about in the same degree in 10 years. And though you do that, you know, 100 years ago, it just amplifies the sort of vernacular, the distance to the vernacular of time, right? Yeah. So I mean, I think it's quite humbling. I personally love environments, and maybe this is just part of my weirdness, where very, 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 I use the word smart or intelligent, the people that really care about trying to understand things, I think is a nice way to say it too, are struggling to decipher things in this context. Because I think the most like useful lens for all of this stuff for me always is like, we aren't that far, maybe 100 years ago, but in a lot of ways it's everybody just sitting around in like caveman times with some sticks and a few rocks and trying to scrape them on the wall and make this diagram to say, well, here's kind of what I think I mean. And we have all this rigor and development and stuff, but like at the end of the day, that's kind of what it is. And even in this case, like we don't, you know, I'm sharing this link that I just sent for this big deep dive on the teleology paper, which I think is pretty cool. And honestly, I think one of the cool things is like compared to these other papers, the teleology paper is like crisp. It has very clear points. They may not be the best points in the world, but like it's a well written paper that to me like okay, like I know what they're saying here, but what it carries over into is what it is. But like I'm so like I really like that the review that I put together about it because but it's also like great material to work with. So that makes it a little bit more palatable maybe.
But as a St. John's College graduate, I love hearing people doing what we did, which is go and read these original papers, and also be both pleasantly surprised of what's actually in them.
Yeah.
Like is that when you've been citing a paper for your entire career, and then you look at it and you're like, wait, this is what we're seeing, and as well, just how incredibly some of these are short papers, some of these are long papers. It's the struggle you have putting them into their historical context.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's what I did for 4. So I like listening to neuroscientists do the same thing with these complexity papers. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and just as a moment for like people a little bit less deep in the weeds, like complexity science is it's complex, but like it's complexity science is not it's hard to convey for folks who haven't really waded into the space. Maybe Bradley or Morgan can speak for this. I know we have other things to do. But like complexity science and this paper series, I'm still sharing my screen here.
Oh, yeah.
This book, okay, is David Krakauer is the head of the Santa Fe Institute, and he's put together a accessible kind of tour guide of his take on complexity, and it's in this book here, but it sort of draws from these 4 volumes that are foundational papers in complexity science. And I don't know how to really best convey that, but like in 1929, there wasn't quote unquote complexity science as we call it now, for one thing. And there really wasn't even cybernetics, which also doesn't really exist anymore, but kind of does. So it's just this sort of, it's a very interdisciplinary attempt to synthesize kind of a new perspective, and there's a lot of debate in the complexity science space about what it is or isn't, and like should you incorporate this into the theory or not. So it's definitely sort of a new science, and a lot of interesting debate in this sort of interdisciplinary field that's trying to look at things differently. So it's not just like an established field that early papers are hard to read. It's this synthetic attempt, which kind of is what happened to cybernetics is something that I followed up on. Like does either you want to add anything to that, just for people who have no idea what complexity science is, or
me? Well, I mean, it's it's supposed to be the study of complexity, which is sort of tautological, but basically, a lot of science has been reductionist, which means you drill down and you find the parts that work together. You find sort of the fundamental units of things and then try to explain them through experiments or through some sort of, some sort of causal relationship or something like that. Basically, you can reduce a system down to its component parts, and those explain everything. with complexity science, the sort of the goal is to find higher order structures, things like networks or emergent structures, and explain them in different ways than we do with reductionism. So with emergence, we like to say the sum of the parts is into the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That's you can show that mathematically, perhaps you can show that statistically. There are a number of ways you can arrive at that. Same with networks. Networks are interacting components. So, just because you can boil things down to their fundamental components doesn't explain everything, because those things may interact. And so you can describe those interactions of the network. And again, it's, there are behaviors that are sort of meta behaviors, or things that are greater than just describing the parts and how they fit together. And then the other thing about complexity theory is that you talk about universality. So like if we can go from like psychology to computer science to, mechanical engineering or, electrical engineering, and we can describe systems in those different fields using the same techniques. So networks are a great example, because you have biological networks, you have technological networks, you have social networks, and they all operate according to the same principles. You can draw a network, you can get statistics out of the network, you can describe things with, different network laws and things like that. So it's very much like, it's very inspired by physics, in that you have universality, you have this quantitative view of things, and you have kind of this way of kind of thinking about how things emerge, and so when we say physics, we kind of mean that there's this old term, I guess, in natural philosophy of physics, as being kind of like physical objects, but also this kind of approach. It's almost mathematical, or has this sort of, like in economics they talk about physics, or sometimes in social sciences they'll talk about social physics. It just means this regularity and universality of things. So that's kind of where complexity theory comes from, what they're trying to do, and it's, as an interdisciplinary enterprise, it's useful because you can go between fields and you have a unifying framework that describes things.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh no, that's about all I wanted to say.
I know I'm sure you have other things to say, but very quickly, I'll conclude by saying, at a really macro level, I mean, it's sort of and I'll reference this paper from wherever I'm supposed to be here. I'll reference this paper from this is the 1943 paper, I think before the term cybernetics really came about, but it was sort of these sort of big thinkers of the time, with Wiener, who kind of pushed cybernetics, and then Rosenbluth did a lot of other things too, and Bigelow as well. And in 1943, this was sort of this is a microcosm of trying to reclaim a concept in philosophy around teleology and purpose. And a lot of what complexity science at large is doing is sort of, I don't know if it's reclaiming, but there's sort of the Enlightenment and the big scientific revolution, all this stuff in Europe in the 17, 16, whatever, hundreds, throughout kind of, to be a scientist meant you break things down, you were to find empirical data. And if you couldn't find the data and you couldn't reduce it to the data, you couldn't reduce it to a measurement, then what are you doing? Because you might be doing too much airy-fairy God stuff, and we've got to get that stuff out of town. So there's a big pressure to like, there's a reason why reductionism and all this stuff took place and took hold and yielded things, and like it's this tough line between saying, oh, empiricism is problematic, or reductions are problematic to it just doesn't cover everything we need it to do. Or it's an incomplete perspective, and there's a lot of tension between people saying, "Oh yeah, complexity is really important," and other people saying, like, maybe everything boils down to the flow of neurons in the brain. Like maybe that's what it is. Like we just have to reduce it to its fundamental parts, and then it's all physics from there. Everything else is just details, kind of a thing. Or not, and there's contention in the development of the field. And this paper, which to kind of complete the circle for the brain-inspired complexity group, is a fun paper. I'm not going to go through it now. Don't worry about that. But it's a fun paper because it's basically these guys trying to reclaim this concept of, I don't have any other good pictures of the whiteboard stuff, but trying to reclaim basically teleology and this idea of purpose, and then using it as a way to sort of categorize complexities of behavior. And that has implications for prediction and sort of feedback, and dovetails into cybernetics and a lot of other modern fields. So I can leave it at that, and we can move on, or anything else people want to say before we do.
Yeah, I think that's a good discussion. We can come back to it later, but I was diagramming out. So those papers that they've been covering in the group that we talked about, I was diagramming that out on my note board. So I have, the reason I asked that original question was because it's fascinating to me why they're hitting those specific papers. What's the end game there? Where are they going?
I think right now it's honestly they were just trying to figure out if they should go in order or not. So they're just the way the papers were presented in the book, and they're they're literally just going through the book.
Okay, that's why.
But there's been some discussion within the server, and I'm not super active in the server to disclose that. But I believe there's been discussion of like, do we want to try to be thematic? Do we want to just go through them? What are we trying to do? And I think it's kind of I think for everybody's, I think that simplicity went in slightly a chronological order, and then they're just trying to find people that kind of feel qualified to sort of chair the discussion about the paper. So it's a bit ragtag, but making the way forward.
I know that in the book, and we've talked about the book before, that he has a very useful sort of typology of different papers that he considers to be the foundations of complexity science.
And it's, I'd be curious, like that's one thing I don't quite understand, like how does the book that David Krakauer put of his own work, the Complex World book, compare to the series? Like, because we're kind of just going through the series of the raw papers right now.
Yeah.
So
because I can see I can see like connections between the papers myself. I'm just wondering if that's what they're thinking. That's why I asked the question. So like, Wright and Waddington, there's a lot of connection there. Wright's 32 paper talks about fitness landscapes. Here he introduces the concept, and the way he does it is by drawing out like these landscapes where you have areas of high fitness, areas of low fitness. And it's like, drawing from population genetics and putting that into basically a diagram that describes that spatially, or, in a way that's like multi-dimensional space. And what's interesting about that is that, there are connections between that and like energy gradients and some of the stuff that people are doing in machine learning, and even like evolutionary computation and things like that. And so that whole concept is interesting. He doesn't really frame it in terms of like energetic landscapes, which people were talking about back then, but it's a concept that's really interesting, and it's the first time people kind of made that connection, and then people developed fitness landscapes, later on, more computationally, more statistically. Waddington then also talks about landscapes, but from an epigenetic standpoint. So epigenetics, of course, is development, and the idea behind an epigenetic landscape is that can we find regions in a landscape that give you stable phenotypes in development? So there's this concept called buffering or channelization, where you find these channels in the landscape where development always proceeds down these trajectories because they're the most stable places. So if you look at like any sort of embryo, you have a great potential to sort of, if you have like a bunch of eggs, like maybe insect eggs or other types of eggs, the offspring could look very different, but they don't. They're often, they're all basically of the same. They maintain their species identity most of the time. They maintain the same phenotype, and so the question is, how does that happen? How does that get maintained? So, and then of course he's talking about landscape, so that connects to right. So there's this landscape aspect. Then the Szilard and Lotka papers. Lotka talks about, a lot of, it kind of comes from a physics standpoint, but a lot of what his work did was inform ecology and how you have these predator-prey models, which are these coevolutionary models, where if you get a lot of predator, they predate on the prey, and the population of the prey crashes. But when that happens, then the population of the predators also crashes, which allows the population of the prey to increase again, and so on and so forth. And you get these interconnected cycles, these predator-prey dynamics. And so it's dynamical systems, but it's really kind of has a lot of implications for biology. And then Szilard talked about, he was famous for the Szilard engine, which is this idea that you can kind of escape the ravages of entropy. You can build these, this engine that has like basically breaks the laws of thermodynamics. And so he talks about that. And this has a lot of relevance to the Maxwell's demon, which we've talked about in the group a lot, which is where you have this process that's anti-entropic. It doesn't result in greater entropy over time. It results in less entropy, and it gives you order instead of just kind of randomness. So I could see like where you have like all these papers kind of very mathematical in their own way, and they kind of fit into a larger theme of kind of like thinking about landscapes, thinking about gradients, maybe then thinking about populations, thinking about like entropy and thermodynamics. And then McCullough Pitts is where you have this neural representation of some type of connectionist representation with some biophysical properties. This is like, the foundation, really the foundations of connectionism, but it's the foundations of like, processing units, kind of modeling those, putting them together into networks, and then, we get connectionism, which, isn't as biophysically inspired, but we get a lot of models where we can model what's going on in the brain. There's been a lot of ink spilled about like these connections. People have written papers about like neural models and other types of models, and like networks and connections. So there are all these like themes that are very nebulous out there that people have made, and I'm just wondering, if that's kind of what people were thinking when they did this. I don't think maybe it was, but
I have to imagine that Brian, what's his name again? I keep forgetting his name. I'm literally in the server with him right now. The person who leads Brain Inspired.
Yeah.
It's Paul.
Paul Middlebrum. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Jeez, I don't know why. I think it's Brian Brain stuff. Thank you, Morgan, for saving me. Anyway, there isn't anything like that yet. I'm sure they're gonna do some kind of a synthetic work. At least I hope they do. That said, I mean, Bradley just sort of freestyle rapped on 4 early foundational papers in complexity science. So maybe we should put something together for that. I've been looking at basically pattern languages for other things too. So maybe there's some patterns and some things to at least to map it. Like you can map at a high level conceptually map out what these papers are getting at, and maybe show. I'm certain that if we just summoned the inevitable future act of summoning the David C. Krakauer Gen AI agentic AI bot to converse with us in this call, which is going to happen. Even they took 11 bots, just precursor to that. I'm sure he'd be like, yeah, here's some some themes and concepts and ways to do this and blah 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 blah. But the materials and artifacts are to be made, so
yeah.
Maybe we'll do something there that way. It's a nice way to push back rigorously or attempt to find rigor to push back against some of the inadequacies of reductionism. I know they're on this one, but whoops. I just found this again and posted it. Big 11 bots. This quote always gets me, but basically but also the development of the ethical social frameworks that will become essential in the future as forms of agents around us diversify. Part of, I think, the higher appeal of attempting complexity science is realizing reductionism, as it has been, there's a constraint on certain critical spaces of, I don't want to say identity, and I think Levin's talking like way, totally changing the game. Living machines are not 20th century machines paper and all that other stuff. But I found this again, and actually, I'm sure we should move on to other things at this point.
Yeah.
So let's do that.
Yeah. Let's see. You had one more thing in the chat. The neuro AI science. This is
not related to this, but when you're talking about Levinbot, I just wanted to say definitely check out recent posts by Russ Poldrack. He's working on a new book, but he's also he's always had very interesting uses of new technology and as example projects, and he's got one of his former postdocs now works at Anthropic, and I'm not going to say that's why he's biased towards Claude, but he's been posting about his use of Claude separately from the book that he's working on. But both should be mentioned.
Where do you follow his stuff? Is it like his blog or like?
Like everyone these days, he seems to have started a Substack.
Okay, so he is there too. Okay.
I'm not condoning that, but but honestly, I get his updates on LinkedIn.
Okay, yeah, okay, good to know. Okay, thank you for your patience, Bradley. I feel like we have many other things to cover and fallen off the wagon a few times.
Called releasing the Krakauer. So
yeah, that's great.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah. All right. So then I wanted to talk about this Neuro AI archive, which was the Patrick Bernald's, I guess, Substack or something. And so this is the what Jesse posted in the chat. So this has a lot of really interesting articles here, and just kind of merging neuro AI with that AI safety stuff, and just kind of going over some other like brain scores, which are these tools that they use to compare artificial neural networks and biological neural networks. Looking at automation of science and different tools we can use in science. Foundation models for neuroscience. We talked about foundation models and how, they're these large scale models, but beyond that, the definition is kind of cagey. And then, so there are a lot of interesting articles here to look at. So I wanted to finish up with two papers. This is under a category called Bio-Inspired Methods. I believe this is a paper that Vidhi posted, I think, in the organoids channel. And the reason it was in the organoids channel is because it talks about dish brain, which we've talked about before. So this is a good dish brain paper from the arXiv. And Cortical Labs is involved in this, and I don't know, some other organizations. So this is biological neurons compete with deep reinforcement learning in sample efficiency in a simulated game world. So they're using dish brain, and then I guess with comparing that with deep reinforcement learning, which we've talked about in past meetings. So let's go over the abstract. So the abstract reads, how do biological systems, machine learning algorithms, compare the number of samples required to show significant improvements in completing a task? We compared the learning efficiency of in vitro biological neural networks to the state-of-the-art deep reinforcement learning algorithms in a simplified simulation of the game Pong. So they're looking at the in vitro biological neural networks are these, you have a bunch of neurons, you have a micro electrode array which records the activity, and there's some feedback to that network from the game. So if you have you want to send a closed loop control signal, the neural network will produce some signal. It will have some action in the game, and then there's feedback from the game. Either you hit your target or not, and that's a stimulation to the network. So people have built these for quite a number of years, where you're stimulating the neuronal network in a dish. You're sending some signal out of the dish, recorded from the electrodes, and you're sending a signal into the game. So it's this closed loop control that mimics kind of mimics a human player of Pong. Of course, Pong is a low complexity video game, so you only have a very small number of moves, and the strategy is basically there's a single strategy, which is to hit the ball with a paddle and to match that. So it's kind of like in robotics, they have something called the pole balancing task, which is where the whole point of the control, it's like this one-dimensional control where you just need to keep a pole upright. If the pole starts to fall in one direction or another, you just move in that to correct it along that one-dimensional axis, and you can keep it upright. And that's sort of a sign of robust control. So that's what we're doing with dish brain, but we're also trying to do this with deep reinforcement learning to see if that can be done efficiently or how dish brain might compare. So using dish brain, a system that embodies in vitro neural networks with in silico computation, which is just to say that there's a computer that, or some program that's, augmenting what happens, the signals that come out of the dish brain. Using a high-density microelectrode array, which we discussed, we contrasted the learning rate and the performance of these biological systems against time-matched learning from three states of the art, state-of-the-art deep learning reinforcement learning algorithms. So they're looking at DQN, A2C, and PPO. We talked about PPO last week. I think we talked about DQN in the past. We kind of talked a lot about reinforcement learning because we're, of course, interested in reinforcement learning for some of our projects, but I think moreover, reinforcement learning is a good sort of comparison to these kind of in vitro biological neural networks, because it really compares, in one sense, it's like comparing apples and oranges. Reinforcement learning has its roots in the brain, because people have proposed that our brains do reinforcement learning. But on the other hand, the way reinforcement learning tends to happen is you have these policies that you select from. So if you're talking about a reinforcement learning algorithm, you're talking about choosing between a set of policies. And so, yeah, I mean, deep reinforcement learning has its own kind of features, but it is an interesting comparison. I think it's really kind of almost like a useful, I mean, if you approach it from one perspective, it's a nice kind of way to look at like, neural information processing. But from another perspective, it is like comparing apples and oranges, because you were like using kind of different ways to do this. This allowed a meaningful comparison between biological neural systems and deep reinforcement learning, which is the way they did it, the comparison here. We find that when samples are limited to a real-world time course, even these very simple biological cultures outperform deep reinforcement learning algorithms across various game performance characteristics, implying a higher sample efficiency. So this means that deep reinforcement learning algorithms underperform these dish brain constructs, these biological networks. And this is where we have a real-world time course, meaning that we have real-world information, or real-time information coming in, I guess. And it's hard to predict what the next state is. Ultimately, even when tested across multiple types of information input to assess the impact of higher dimensional data input, biological neurons showcased faster learning than all deep reinforcement learning agents. So this is, biological neurons are doing learning, of course. They're doing like Hebbian learning. They're doing maybe some sort of biological reinforcement learning, which means that when they get a reward, like if they do, if they're able to, say, hit the ball with the paddle, they kind of know, or I want to say they kind of know, but they have this reinforcement of that thing. So you get Hebbian learning, you get a reinforcement of a certain action by the network, and certain connections are strengthened, and you end up with this, sort of natural reinforcement learning based on Hebbian learning, or scaffolded on Hebbian learning. Whereas in your deep reinforcement learning agents, you're having to learn policies or choose between policies. Sometimes those policies are emergent. Sometimes you have to decide what those are in advance. So there are a lot of, in the design of a reinforcement learning agent, you have to kind of think about all those things. So that's what they're saying. And basically, the lesson here is that, as murky as the sort of behavior of a dish brain or a biological neural network is, that maybe is faster than what we can design in agents. So that's kind of the lesson. The only problem is, of course, it's hard to do things like credit assignment in a biological neural network, because we don't have, we can't trace back every sort of information processing step in a network like that. And sometimes there aren't even discrete steps. Sometimes there are a lot of things that are emergent, or there are a lot of things that can happen simultaneously. And so we can't disentangle the effects of those things. So that's kind of what they're getting at with this paper. So, we've talked about dish brain in the past and how they've used it to play games, and we've said, yeah, this could be, less impressive than it seems, because I can't remember exactly what the criticisms were, but let's put that into context. Maybe we can go back and think about what those criticisms were and kind of bring that to this paper, but maybe not right now. So the introduction reads: both biological and machine intelligence systems demonstrate the ability to learn and achieve goals. Although the complexity of and drivers behind these tasks may differ, comparisons between these types of systems can yield valuable insights. Even definition of what traits artificial intelligence should demonstrate are heavily informed by traits observed in biological intelligence. In other words, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we use biological intelligence as sort of a biased comparator. So we say, well, we know what intelligence looks like in the real world, and we're going to model it using an artificial algorithm. And if it exhibits things like intelligent behavior that aren't biological, we won't necessarily be able to recognize them. So, that's, and it sounds kind of weird because you're like, well, that's what intelligence is, right? Like, it's just something that we can see in nature, and they should all, intelligence should look the same across every context. Well, we had this discussion about the definitions of intelligence, how we have many definitions of intelligence across different fields, and how those are very different. So intelligence may mean one thing, it may mean many things, and we don't really know. I mean, basically, intelligence is this complexity of behavior. So it's, it might be some learning, it might be some memory, it might be some prediction, and it's a lot of things that result in something we may or may not be able to identify as intelligence. I know it almost sounds also like you're saying, well, if I build an artificial intelligence, whatever it produces is intelligence, and I can't say I'm never wrong about that. But but anyways, it's a tough thing to kind of disentangle. But that being said, what we're actually interested in are these comparisons between biological and machine intelligence. And so that's why we're interested in kind of benchmarking artificial intelligence on biological intelligence, because ultimately we want to compare them. And, we want to say maybe which is better, or if we're getting towards sort of intelligence in our machines and our representations. So it's been notoriously difficult to sort of compare biological and machine intelligence, as the scale of connections in even simple biological organisms far exceeds those found in artificial neural networks or comparable machine learning algorithms. However, by taking a systems-based approach, we aim to compare data gathered from a biological neural network, or a BNN, using the dish brain system. And we're doing this against time-matched learning from deep reinforcement learning algorithms. We're comparing DQN, A2C, and PPO with dishbrain. Despite the inherent differences between silicon and biological systems, such as power consumption and network size, this approach makes it possible to explore learning performance and sample efficiency. So we have much larger networks in artificial systems and much greater power consumption in artificial systems. And yet that doesn't necessarily produce the kinds of behavioral complexity that we see in biological systems. That's basically the problem. And so we want to know, first of all, why that is. And second of all, how can we overcome these limitations? So if we could build artificial systems that not only did things that were similar to biological intelligence and performed at a similar level or a similar rate of information processing, but do it with smaller networks and lower power consumption. This is not trivial because deep learning is running into this problem where we're building these massive networks, we're doing massive amounts of power consumption, and we would like to make those systems more efficient if possible. So such should compelling differences be found, it would further support extended efforts to understand key differences in the information processing dynamics unique to each system. So they are making the argument that artificial systems might have unique features that you don't see in biology. But again, how do we know that's intelligence, or how do we know that's just an artifact of the artificial system? It's really kind of a hard thing to suss out. But basically, they talk about reinforcement learning, how this is like a very popular way to do simulated intelligence. And so we have to kind of think about reinforcement learning in the artificial sense and then kind of map that to biology. So reinforcement learning implies learning the best policy to maximize an expected cumulative long-term reward through many steps in order to achieve objectives or goals. A deep reinforcement learning approach integrates artificial neural networks with a reinforcement learning framework that helps the system to achieve its goals. It maps states and actions, which are the rewards that they bring, combining function approximation and target optimization. So this is where we have these states and rewards that are, or states and actions that are these representations of things happening in the network, or those are the things that we want the network to learn and to optimize. So that's, and of course in brains, we don't know if they're necessarily optimizing for that, but that's, the outcome is basically to produce these things that we can recognize as states and actions. And so, reinforcement learning has allowed us to build systems that have beat human experts in different types of gameplay, like poker and multiplayer games, complex board games, Go, chess, and the suite of Atari video games. So we talked about that last week, where we had these deep reinforcement. I think it was PPO that was performing on these different benchmarks. Some of them were Atari games, some of them were other benchmarks. So this is a common thing in the field. Reinforcement learning still faces real challenges, including but not limited to complexities in the selection of hyperparameters and reward structure, sample inefficiency, reproducibility issues, and catastrophic forgetfulness. So we have these features of these artificial systems that are brittle. We have catastrophic forgetting. We have this sample inefficiency, which means that you have a lot of samples and not a lot of learning. And we also have these hyperparameters that we need to tune, that we need to figure out how to sort of optimize a reward structure to make sure that those get tuned optimally. Now, in biological brains, we may or may not have hyperparameters, but that's not something that we typically can identify, or we don't know what the biology is doing to optimize its performance. So hyperparameters aren't really a concept in biological networks, except that, maybe if we modeled it, we could identify different things that could be optimized. Biological networks are very sample efficient, which means that they use maybe a small number of samples to learn things, extract things from stimuli. And then biological networks can encode memories. There's forgetfulness in biological systems, but not this catastrophic forgetting where they forget, like if you switch context, if you switch to a new task, it forgets everything from the old task. And those are the things that, for now, we really don't understand how those work in biological networks. So they talked about dish brain, and I don't know if this is like the way they approach this is that dish brain is the second coming of greatness, but like there's this definitely they want to make the case that biological networks are superior to artificial networks, and maybe to understand why. So dish brain, of course, has this closed loop control system. Your deep reinforcement learning algorithm also does this closed loop control, but it has to measure all these aspects of the environment and then put them into this deep network, and then you have to extract the optimal policy from that. Okay, so I'm not going to get into this stuff, I don't think. There are a lot of nice kind of results here where they talk about, they make the electrophysiological they use electrophysiological measures to look at the performance of dish brain, and then you're looking at paddle and ball position in the reinforcement learning algorithm case. So you're making comparisons there between the two systems, and they have these analyses here. So I don't want to get into that too much. But just to say that I guess DishBrain outperforms these deep reinforcement learning algorithms. Let's see if we can get down to the discussion that might be more useful. I guess we have all these tables. I don't want to get through any of those. Okay. Well, this is a very long paper with a lot of results. But let's see if I can find, results. And then we have our discussion. Okay, so let's get into the discussion. So the advantages and disadvantages of biological versus machine intelligence were often discussed, yet technical limitations prevented some comparisons. So they do the comparison. So while direct comparisons between these systems are naturally constrained, even what is referred to as a neuron is inconsistent between fields of research. So that's a problem that we have to think about. Maybe we need better representations of neurons in artificial networks. Maybe it's, that's what the secret sauce is and why we can't make this direct comparison, or can we make the performance jump? The aim of this work was to determine whether meaningful performance differences would arise between learning systems as contained systems. So we have this contained neural network in a dish, and then we have this contained algorithm on a computer, and we know what the limits of those systems are, so we can kind of figure out what inside them is contributing to this difference. And so this says maybe we should explore biological networks as computational machines, and so that's the argument they're making here. And so yes, this is all consistent with past research. And they actually used a biologically inspired algorithm to explore some of these, some of the benefits of the biological network. So they implemented an active inference agent that uses counterfactual learning, and they report these results in the supplemental materials. Improved learning rates observed in the biologically inspired learning protocol supports the potential of active inference agents to provide valuable insights into optimized learning strategies, thereby enhancing our understanding of these dynamics. However, these active inference algorithms are still highly dependent on the chosen hyperparameters and require relatively higher power consumption compared to biological systems. Nonetheless, these results highlight the value of further exploring biologically inspired systems of learning and support the notion that SBI systems, or I guess, I don't know what SBI systems are, may offer a useful pathway to do this in the future. So that's that paper. We had a bunch of discussion in the chat here. This is directed at Vidhi from Jesse. You're always welcome to give updates. You can say anything. Okay. Yeah, this is just kind of talking about updates. Okay, so why don't we get to the other paper? This is another arXiv paper. And this is the role of bio-inspired modularity in general learning. So this is talking about this bio-inspired aspect of learning and modularity. This is Iwan Barinholtz, who heads up et.al. So this is, I know where this is coming from.
I was just going to say that he's at et.al. and does a lot of interesting stuff in the cognitive space. It's good to see the paper.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been checking out their work, and they're doing a lot of theoretical work that kind of ties together AI and the brain, and that's kind of their space. So they're doing a kind of a similar thing to the last paper, but they're approaching it from more of a theoretical standpoint. Okay. So the abstract reads, one goal of general intelligence is to learn novel information without overriding prior learning. So we want to be able to, again, not have these catastrophic forgetting events where the system forgets everything it learned if you switch context. You want to be able to learn from novel stimuli. You don't want to have to sample it 40 times or 50 times. You want true one-shot learning. And when we talk about one-shot learning, we talk about some of that is like very general features or very easy to reach features. We want to have this sort of system where we can learn novel information that isn't sort of consistent with the distribution that we're sampling from. But we also don't want to use that as sort of like the mean behavior. We want to put that sort of exception in our database, and we don't want to overwrite everything we've learned about the world prior to that. So it's a very delicate balance between learning novel information but not thinking that it represents, the mean information of the world. It's kind of like if you taste new foods, you don't think that every new food you taste is sort of the way food tastes. You just make the distinction between different types of tastes and different types of foods, and you make exceptions for some foods over others. You make comparisons between everything tastes like chicken, say, and then you have like different foods that you can describe very distinctly. So that's something that is a general intelligence feature, but something that artificial intelligence can't necessarily do. The utility of learning without forgetting, or CF, is twofold. First, the system can return to previously learned tasks after learning something new. In addition, so they can, you can switch contexts, you can come back to the old context, and you can compare it with that new context, and you can make a generalized statement, or you can make a statement that what's unique about a specific context. That's, it sounds kind of simple, but it's really not. In addition, bootstrapping previous knowledge may allow for faster learning of a novel task. Previous approaches to CF and bootstrapping are primarily based on modifying learning in the form of changing weights to tune the model to the current task, overriding previously tuned weights in the previous task. So this is again what I was describing with catastrophic forgetting, or the reason why that happens. And the reason why it happens is because networks, especially like deep learning networks, always have to kind of encode everything in their weights. And because of that, they have to change their weights every time they learn new things or switch contexts. And so those old weights get overwritten. So you'd have no way of preserving the weights from the previous context. You could, save the weights and then average the new weights with the old weights. But that is also not sufficient because that just gives you a big smear of information. It doesn't give you any distinctions or comparisons for that. So this is the problem. It's definitely an artifact of artificial neural network. Biological neural networks probably use some mechanism, a lot of different mechanisms for encoding memories, aside from just the weight structure. So we know that, we have supporting cells, we have different neurotransmitters, we have different places where memories are encoded, we have networks where, although we can interfere with memories pharmacologically, we also have distributed memories, and those distributed memories are robust. So that may mean that they have multiple different types of encodings in the brain. So there are a lot of ways that biological networks can overcome or compensate for this problem of overwriting weights or averaging weights or whatever. However, another critical factor that has been largely overlooked is the initial network topology, or architecture. So this is where we have the structure of the network, and that architecture is important because it does give you information. The network topology, if it's a big circle of neurons, or if it's like the layers of neurons that have like this random connectivity or this full connectivity. Those are all sort of, each of those connections have weights, but if there's some sort of structure to the topology, the structure matters. So it's not just as simple as having like these fully connected layers and just weighting them accordingly and producing sort of a structure. You can actually have physical changes in the structure of the network or physical arrangements of the network structure that can actually aid learning or aid that encoding of that information as, I guess you could say, weights, but like I'm thinking more about Hebbian learning, where you need to make, comparisons of, is my neighboring neuron active? And if I'm active and they're active, then maybe there's a connection there. There's this dictum in Hebbian learning, which is neurons that fire together wire together. And that's kind of, if you do that, you get, weight that's high. But you also, it's not as simple as just, because you can imagine that if networks were just comparisons of pairwise neurons, that would be one thing, but you have all sorts of other partners that you have to listen to. So it's not as simple as just saying, we're going to find some weights. Those weights will describe learning, and then we can, those are just an easy heuristic for learning. There's probably more going on, probably to do with how the networks are connected, what partners are get preferential treatment over other partners, and so forth. Here we argue that the topology of biological brains likely evolves certain features that are designed to achieve this kind of informational conservation. So what they're saying is that in biological brains you have structures. Those structures have specific types of connectivity. If you go to the cerebellum, for example, it's connected in a very different way than the medial temporal lobe or the hippocampus. You also have the neocortex, which is wired in a different way or structured in a different way than the thalamus. And of course, functionally, they do different things. And so there's a reason for that. It's because in evolution, they've, acquired a function, specific function, and now they're interacting with one another, but not all to all. There are specific connections between, say, the thalamus and the cortex. So in the thalamus locally and in the cortex locally, there's information processing going on. There's structure that's unique to those structures, but then there are interconnections that link those functions and link together for larger scale functions. And those are all kind of put there by evolution. In particular, we consider that the highly conserved properties of modularity. And modularity is just where you have compartments of things. So instead of having like a brain is like this undifferentiated structure of connections, and you just get this huge network that, and just expand the size of the network, and you get more computational power. You split that network up into pieces or compartments. Those compartments are specialized or structured in different ways, and then they're connected independently of that local structure to give you this large network, but the large network has different pieces that kind of fit together. So that's what they mean by modularity. And there's this whole history, it's kind of notorious in cognitive science, about cognitive modules and modularity, which I won't get into here. So they're kind of treading in this sort of dubious space with respect to the history of cognitive science. But I think the idea of modularity is basically interesting and somewhat correct in that, you have to have this sort of local structure that translates into this global structure. And the global structure gives you properties that the local structure can't solve on its own. It is a bit like emergence in complexity theory. And in fact, in complexity theory, a lot of times people will talk about local and global effects. And those local effects are conditioned upon modularity. So that's an interesting connection there. So modularity, which is conserved in evolution, a lot of your structures like the thalamus go back, they're phylogenetically ancient. They have common ancestry that's deep in the tree of life. The cerebellum is the same way. So there's this modularity that's highly conserved, and that may offer a solution to the weight update learning methods that adhere to learning without catastrophic forgetting and bootstrapping constraints. So in other words, we can overcome catastrophic forgetting due to weight update learning methods by this principle of modularity, by this principle of linking together modules into this information processing machine that's very phylogenetically distinct, very, heterogeneous. Final considerations are then made on how to combine these two learning objectives in a dynamical general learning system. So you're thinking now about learning as a dynamical system and what these models give you in terms of enabling that. So, this is a theoretical paper, kind of walks through their argument. And so this is all very general stuff. It doesn't draw, I don't think, from any specific, well, I guess there are examples from neuroimaging and, and then links to computation, but it doesn't really give you, I don't think they're trying to implement anything here, or they don't give you any specific biological details beyond, like, talking about this idea of neural architectures and where they come from phylogenetically. So complex neural architectures are thought to have emerged in the Cambrian explosion, or about 540 million years ago, with records of both camera eyes and the emergence of animals with complex behaviors. In contemporary species, the four basic brain structures, the telencephalon, the cerebellum, the diencephalon, and the mesencephalon, are preserved across nearly all mammalian species. So those four structures, you'll find this in fish brains, you find this three-lobed brain. In mammals, you find these four structures. Those all have sort of a common ancestry. So the common ancestor of mammals have these four structures. The common ancestor of fish has three structures. And, you're building upon this basic architecture. And so in mammalian species, you find different versions of these four structures. They've been differentiated into different other structures, but you can trace them all back to these four, and you can trace them back to a common ancestry. So this is where, you get this deep conservation, and you don't see this sort of structured insects. They have their own highly preserved modular nervous system structures, and that has a deep common ancestry as well. So the idea is you evolve these basic modules, and then they differentiate across the evolution of that clade, or that taxonomic grouping. And so, so then they get into how this works in humans, the modularity that we see in neuroimaging, and all of that. So that's their argument. So I think it's a nice kind of overview of that. Okay, so yeah, I think that's all for today. Morgan put a link to Russ Poldrak's Substack, and why better code can lead to better science, I guess. Yeah.
As well as it's got a link for his book.
Okay.
The book is working.
All right, yeah. So check that out. Yeah. So any other comments or questions? All right. So I guess that's all for today. Thanks for attending. See you next week. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.